Hello, Krista. Welcome to the Sunseeker podcast. I'm incredibly grateful for you to give us some of your time, and thank you for being a part of my spiritual journey. I feel like all of these conversations are kind of like a part of my spiritual journey and the spiritual journey of the audience. I wanted to just ask the initial question, just like how you became aware of the frame drum and what it means to you at this point in your life.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for inviting me for this conversation. I'm so honored to have this time to connect with you. The frame drum, well, wow, I had such a deep interest in music since the time I was really young. I used music in a sense to medicate myself, to recalibrate, to uplift myself. I just found myself turning to music in many, many different genres from the time I was young. And my mom was really a music seeker and connoisseur. So she just had a huge archive of music. And I grew up in a household where music was always playing. So we kind of had the soundtrack to our lives, and dancing in the living room and crying and grieving and celebrating. And we always had music, and also going to a lot of live shows in the United States, and also seeing Indian classical music in India was so transformative. I felt like it actually took me on this incredible journey, and really music was a means for journeying both inside and out. And so when I was in my late teens, I just had kind of a serendipitous experience where I had taken my first musical lesson was actually a dulcimer, which is this small stringed instrument that you put on your lap. And it was actually with a musician, Ben Harper's grandmother, at her music store. And I was actually skateboarding home, being a California girl, one day with that instrument, and I crashed and broke that instrument. And somehow this drive to learn an instrument just kept with me. And one day someone showed up at my house with a drum set. Actually, it was a boyfriend I was dating at the time. And, young person, first communal household out of, school. And boyfriend sets up this drum set in the living room when my other roommates went out of town. So we were having, a week long kind of musical jam. And one day I got behind the drum set on my lunch break because I worked where I could walk home on lunch. And I got behind that drum set. I kind of snuck behind it. No one was around. Roommates were out of town, got the drumsticks out. And I started hanging around on this drum set. And lo and behold, I didn't know that my boyfriend was going to be home, and he came around the corner. And I kind of, shamefully, really quickly tried to put the drum sets away. And he just looked at me and he said, "Don't stop." And it was an incredible moment because it could have gone either way. And there was something in the way that he was so generous in that moment, that I had gotten on his drum set and was just banging away. And it just became this running joke between my friends and I, because after that, he was like, "Well, let me show you some of the things." And so he started showing me a few things on the drum set. And it became this running joke that I was now sort of anointed a drummer. And someone showed up at my house with a drum set that they had brought and bought at a garage sale. And so I took to it and I thought, okay, here's my instrument. I was looking for an instrument. I never thought it would be the drum set. And it led me on this journey of drumming. And I met my first true hand drum teacher, who was a man named Babatunde Olatunji. And he was a Nigerian drummer that had come to the United States and had this drum troupe called the Drums of Passion. A little story about Babatunde was that he actually, he just traveled all over the world, really, with this incredible drum troupe of African drummers. And I went and studied with him in my early 20s, and I went to a few workshops and we would do like 4-day workshops or weekend workshops. And I was at one of them, and they kept trying to get me to get in with the dancers because they had these beautiful African dancers. And I sort of pleaded with Baba. I'm like, I really want to do the drums. And he was like, okay, you can do the drums. And so he started teaching me the style of African drumming. And from there, after he passed, I just kept seeking out the drum. And I had given away the drum set, and another person came to my house with a drum set. I was like, I can't get away from the drums. And the drum set was a beautiful instrument, but it was also quite um, just big and arduous, and has all these pieces of equipment that you have to kind of break down. And so the frame drum comes in one day. I am in a store in California, in Santa Monica, and I walk in, and on the flyer board, there's a flyer that says "When the Drummers Were Women." And I just stopped and stood and read that 2 or 3 times, "When the Drummers Were Women." And I had always associated drumming, actually, particularly kind of with a masculine way, or men in general, which I always felt like I was entering into a boys' club. And I was welcomed, and I loved it. And I loved that powerful energy that does exist in the male and the female. But this idea that there was a time when the drummers were women really struck me. So I ended up going to that workshop that was named "When the Drummers Were Women." And I ended up meeting a woman who would become my primary teacher. Her name was Layne Redmond, the late Layne Redmond, and she ended up writing a book of that same name, "When the Drummers Were Women." And so that first night, I was introduced to the frame drum at that workshop, and I had never seen or heard. Well, I had probably heard, but I didn't realize what I was hearing. This very earthy, primal, melodic style of drumming. And I knew by the end of that weekend that she would be a powerful teacher in my life. In fact, I had a feeling that she would actually be a mentor, and that it was somebody that I would just follow for a really long time. And I was also looking for a mentor specifically at that time in my life. So seeing her drum, and then also these ancient images of women with the frame drum and women with the frame drum, there was a lot of sort of mythology and lore and archetype and symbol that she brought through. She was teaching us in a very ceremonial style. And so I knew at that time that this was going to be a path. And that is how I found the frame drum.
It's just so interesting that the sense that I got was just the drums were kind of like following you your entire life. Like each stage you would kind of step into, it was almost like the drums were pulled towards you as much as you were pulled towards the drums. And then kind of aligning with your mentor, Layne Redmond. I think that's just an incredible, it's like segue into that journey that you've been on with the frame drum. And so I guess what is just, I think that there's like a universal element to drums. And today we kind of, it seems that the majority of drummers seem to be, men. And so can you like speak a little bit about when the drummers were women and all the different cultures that kind of transcended?
Yes, it's a polycultural instrument, the frame drum. And it's an archetypal idea, meaning most every culture creates some kind of drum, and the frame drum really is the primary instrument. And what we have now, sort of as the proof of this concept and this idea and this true lineage, we could say, are thousands and thousands of images from art all over the world that depict really the archetype of woman with sacred drum or frame drum. And it turns out to be, it was a very widespread phenomenon. And there's also, of course, men that drum, as we've talked about. And this idea, though, that women were drummers goes so far back, thousands and thousands of years. And we see these artistic images in the form of clay statues, small little clay statues, in hieroglyph in Egypt, in temple carvings in Egypt, vase paintings, in different kinds of paintings, frescoes, amulets that people would wear, jewelry with women with frame drum, or sometimes a god or a goddess or a priestess. And then there's also the written record that goes back thousands of years, really beginning in the Middle East and Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq and areas of Iran. Really, Syria, all throughout the Middle East, has a very deep, rich, widespread, established frame drumming tradition that is in a continuum. Whereas in certain areas of the Mediterranean, and then all throughout different areas of Europe, the drum was there very prominently, and then at times the drum would be forbidden or would be forgotten. So there's an archaeological record of, again, these artistic images. And in the book, When the Drummers Were Women, my teacher started to catalog all of these images that had actually come from her teacher originally, a man named Glenn Velez, who is really instrumental in sort of this modern renaissance of frame drumming in the Western world. And my teacher, Layne, studied with Glenn. And as she was studying with him and apprenticing with him, he had all of these slides of images of people with the frame drum. And Layne had an art history background, and she was also a mythologist. And she started looking at the images and really kind of put this puzzle together. When she looked at them, she started to see this repetition that the majority of the images were of women and of priestesses and of goddesses with the frame drum. And I think it's a really interesting myth, and it's a truth, really, that many people are still unaware how deeply the frame drum was connected to these ancient traditions, oftentimes venerating a goddess such as Inanna or Ereshkigal, Demeter, Hathor. There's connection to Aphrodite and the frame drum. There's connection to the Greek muses and the frame drum, and many different priestesses and the priestesshoods. These groups of women from the Mediterranean would basically play the frame drum in ceremonies, in rituals, in celebrations, in rites of passage. All throughout the mystery schools of Egypt were very much driven by music, and the music was kind of the driving force of these celebrations, and the frame drum was the primary instrument of the priestesses in the temples of Egypt. They would also use the sistrum, which is like a shaking instrument with jingles on it, sometimes with the head of like Hathor Isis carved on it. And then there would be the women with the frame drums, and also the double flute, the olos. So we would have these processionals or these different orchestras of musicians. So if you can imagine, in these temples made of stone and earth, and these incredible structures that so many are familiar with, these ancient temple complexes. And then if you put the music inside of that in your imagination, there's a whole kind of study of the archaeomusical history, which is basically attuning our ears to what the soundscape of the ancient world would have been like. And again, the primary instrument was the frame drum.
That's such a rich history. And, you're continuing that history. You have a sacred drumming academy, and that's just that's fabulous in and of itself. Can you speak to how you started that academy and just how it's grown?
Sure, thank you. It was something that was a calling, but it was also being called out of me. I played the frame drum really regularly, really as a personal practice. And so for years, I just was at home alone, and I would often set up my practice space sort of in a ceremonial way. I might have a candle burning, maybe some incense and a cup of tea. And I would just sort of make it like this luxurious environment because I really needed something that would draw me into the practice. At that time of my life, I was going through a dark night of the soul, and I felt like I needed something that was a sacred practice, in that it was meditative and contemplative. And so that's what I did for years and years and years. And I was very content to just play my drum really alone. And sometimes I would play with other musicians. And I started being asked to do ceremonial drumming. And that just came as a surprise, kind of out of the blue. I started receiving invitations when someone was recently bereaved, if someone in their family had passed and that they needed something that helped to create ceremonial space. And the drum was meant to create a container of sound in order for people to be able to sort of rest in being held by the frequency and the vibration of this soundscape. Oftentimes we would do ceremonies around a body of water where this person could immerse. There are some sacred springs around where I live, and they have actually steps that go into these sacred warm springs, like a hot spring, but that just almost like bath temperature. And so I would be asked to go and sit at the head of the water. And when the person would descend down into those, through the sacred springs, I would be there so that there was someone else in that space while they were cleansing. It's also part of the Jewish tradition of the mikveh ceremony. It's almost also similar to different rituals that are conducted with water, and also elder rites of passage and different types of ceremonies where people might be celebrating something, birthing ways, blessing ways, and also being asked to drum for people that were recently deceased upon really their hospice or even their deathbed, to come in after the person had passed away and hold space with the drumming or even with the handpan, which was something also to help those left behind, the families, so that there was also music, accompaniment, along with some of the traditional things we think about, like having flowers or having some kind of anointing or a prayer or a liturgy or a chant or a poem being read. And so from that really path, which in a sense wasn't really a career pathway, but I also was then being asked to teach groups of women. And so I started teaching groups of women and groups of men and groups of all different kinds of people. And through that, I started connecting more online and internationally and through this modern technology that we're using right now, and found that I had a real impetus for technology. I actually really love what it can bring for this global World Wide Web, this amazing way of connecting each other and connecting cross-culturally. And so that was sort of the impetus to then create the Sacred Drumming Academy. And in doing that, I filmed probably about 100 or so, there's more in the archive now, but 100 or so videos that are from everything from 5-minute long lessons on how to play the frame drum, the posture, the different strokes, some of the alignment, and then all the way through to the history, the herstory of the drum, some of the modern scientific research behind it, different concepts about practice and about ritual or ceremonial drumming. So that all started to come together within this archive that's the Sacred Drumming Academy, that people can kind of enter into and go at their own pace to learn not only the technical playing techniques with ornamentations and all the things we do technically with the musicality of drumming, but then also this ancient history and the mythology that really gives a person this deeper sense of the connection to this ancient, modern, and really futuristic practice of drumming.
Yeah, it sounds very healing the way that you describe the practices, and like kind of a divine energy that's healing, that I would say, it's such a rich history, such a rich divine feminine history, that it's just simply like a sounding that you're bringing that, forward and continuing that tradition. You were speaking about some of the, I guess, benefits medically to the frame drum, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, it's another really fascinating subject, and there is more and more information coming out about how humans really have always been using music. There's even theories that we played music before we even had language, that we were making sounds, we were making rhythms, of course, we were dancing. There's evidence of music being played in the ancient cave complexes. For instance, in Germany, they found a 40,000-year-old bone flute. It's a vulture bone. Sometimes they're made of mammoth or different kinds of bones. And these little flutes still hold pitch. And if we go so far back in this collective memory, we can only imagine the soundscape in the caves and then migrating out, in a sense, in rhythmic cycles. And nature is so rhythmic, and so much of how we move in the world, speaking sometimes can be rhythmic, talking and walking, and there's just so much rhythm in nature. And so it's embedded in us, and also, of course, heartbeat rhythm, which each human has gestated to mother's heartbeat while in the womb, and also to the blood flow. So we gestate in this rhythmic pulse. So there's a primal remembrance for people. I think that's one of the reasons why drumming can be so alluring sometimes, is that there is this primal remembrance of our time gestating to rhythm. And rhythm also is an organizing principle. So we actually perhaps organized in groups and in tribes through different rhythmic signaling, and through rhythmic coherence. There are hypotheses that our being rhythmic actually gave us an advantage over other species, perhaps like Neanderthals and other different humanoids, I guess you could say, that's part of what gave us an advantage. So these are some of the things that tie into the modern research and the modern science about how drumming affects us, which there's this idea of a driving mechanism, a rhythmic driving mechanism, and it drives the brain waves into different frequencies, from the beta, which is just our everyday talking, walking kind of brainwave, down into the alpha wave, where we start to get a little more meditative, and then down into a theta wave, which the theta brainwave is really associated with meditation, with shamanic states of mind and things like that. So we know that drumming and rhythm can affect, first and foremost, the brain waves, and then also how that can affect us physiologically. There's also different studies being done just purely on recreational music making. And really, that can be many different kinds of instruments. But when people start to engage in recreational music making, where they're doing it for fun, they're doing it for connection, for group coherence, that there's some healing that can happen. And when we use the word healing, I always think of it as, it's an ongoing state. We might not get to like an end place, and it might not heal certain ailments for people, but it can create a healing homeostasis in the body where we come into greater coherence and recalibration, for instance, of the nervous system. There can be certain qualities where drumming can affect immunological functioning. There's really interesting studies being done for drumming for recovery from addiction as an adjunct and as a complementary tool. So we're not necessarily saying, just drum and just do that, but have it as one of your modalities within your medicine chest of different things that you use when you're going through recovery, or when people are recovering from different kinds of traumas and things. And so those are some of the ideas behind the modern science. And there are some pretty good studies out there that are showing people hooked up to either like an electroencephalogram or something where they're being able to read the brain and see what is lighting up and the brain waves. And that's one other piece that I'd love to mention, is that music and playing music, it creates whole brain functioning. It has the capacity to create that, where left and right sides of the brain can really start to light up. And we see that there is more of the brain, in a sense, being activated. And that in itself, I find to be inspiring. Oh, and there's just so much more I could say. I just have to say a couple more things about the brain
Yeah, go for it.
optimization. Thank you so much. The brain
Yeah.
optimization, I find that that's something that I personally have really connected with. And though I haven't been studied in a clinical setting, my own experience of that is that the drumming has started to awaken different parts of my brain that either were dormant or kind of atrophied, specifically some of the mathematical areas of the brain, because we do get into drumming where we're starting to use different numerical compositions and we're working with numbers, and that lights up this area of the brain. And I find that it does create more brain optimization. Almost, I liken it to doing a crossword puzzle or Sudoku.
Hmm.
And it's one of the ways that we can approach the drumming is in this kind of mathematical, formulaic way. And we end up going into some really complex compositions with different numbers, and we kind of work these different subdivisions and things like that. It starts out really simply, and then it gets more complex and mathematical as time goes on. And then there's this other way that we approach the drumming, which is just purely intuitive. You could say shamanic in the sense, though I don't teach that and I don't consider myself that, just for clarity. But it's, again, these different states of mind where we are moving into different brain waves that give us this meditative experience, this opening of consciousness. And so that's another way that we approach the drumming, is purely intuitively. And those things can work together, where we've got the art and the creativity, and then the science and more of the research.
Yeah. This is something that I was just thinking about just when I was just looking through all the research about frame drums. When I was in school, the first instrument everyone was given was a recorder. And I feel like if everyone was given a frame drum as the first, instrument, that would be really just all the medical benefits and the overall just connection that rhythm has. I think that would just be something that is really a groundbreaking and interesting study to follow, see how, that like lifelong journey with an instrument like this, like how it affects, cognition, development, and all of these things. Because personally, it's just like you were talking about recovery, and the world is facing so many different challenges, and I feel like music and other, ways or modalities of reaching a meditative state is something that is, definitely beneficial and definitely like we're saying healing. So, where do you see yourself taking the your practice and your school, like as of right now? Like, what are the plans, I guess, for the next year moving forward for you?
Well, the online teaching and also in-person classes, I do local circles in different styles of the frame drum, this tambourine style with the jingles and kind of the shaking and stepping with the tambourine, and then also the tar drum, which I don't have here, but it's just the very simple round shape. It's just a simple construction of skin and wood. Nowadays, we also have a tuning system in there, and it's played with the fingers rather than the beater or the stick. So sometimes people might associate the frame drum with the shamanic drum, which is its whole category, beautiful category of drumming. But the style of drumming that I'm teaching, again, we're using the fingers, and it also is very ancient. It's probably almost as ancient as with drumming with the stick. There's kind of a debate in modern ethnomusicology about which style of drumming is older. And so I'll be teaching people that style of drumming. We have the upright position where you play kind of up here and you can step and you can dance and you can move around. You could be in a processional. And then I also teach the style where we're playing the drum on the lap. And then also you can do a style freehand between the knees, which is more like the style that you might see somebody playing a djembe. And so in person and then also in retreat settings and things like that. And I'm really continuing to gather this archive of the ancient imagery of the people from the ancient world with the frame drum, and especially women, because there are so many thousands and thousands of images of women of every color from almost every continent, many, many different traditions and lineages that I think would be really surprising to people. Again, all throughout the Middle East, in Africa, there's Asian areas that have frame drumming into Russia and the Koa Peninsula, Norway, Sweden, Finland, all throughout Greece, Italy, southern Italy, even Scotland has a frame drumming tradition that goes back at least 500 years by written record, and surely went further back from that time. The Romans brought the frame drum to England thousands of years ago. And again, a lot of these traditions died out. Sometimes the drums were forbidden. So we're continuing to kind of expand the research on just how widespread the drum is and was, and that will be moving into the different archives inside the Academy, and then also continue to research the modern sound healing connected with rhythm and drumming, and teaching other people to facilitate drumming circles and also drumming for different ceremonies and celebrations. There's just so many avenues for this instrument to reach different demographics. And that's something I'm really interested in, are different demographics that would welcome the drum or would be served by the drum, could find something for themselves, whether it be groups of children or elders or different demographics of people in different types of community and different worldviews. Thinking about, just many different ways that the drum can come into different types of communities for different reasons. You could also, again, drum, for the brain optimization, and you could just get with your friends and kind of playfully challenge each other with different rhythmic time signatures and kind of play on that cognitive calisthenic level, and just get really nerdy and kind of mathematical with it. Or you could play for ceremony and meditation and just to recalibrate your nervous system, and to also bring it into centers where people might be struggling with different health issues or recovering from different addictions, that the drum can facilitate that healing medicine chest of modalities. So that's a little bit about where I see it going. I'm excited to see others bringing the drums into their communities and facilitating really the art of teaching and facilitation. That's another passion.
Yeah, it sounds like just it could be a tool to really, heal the world and kind of just transcends all barriers or any kind of, I don't know, so much of like there's roadblocks and it seems like in everything in music and culture, and having a specific instrument that transcends, race, gender, and all ethnicities is something that's very powerful. And I just commend you on, speaking to that, and hopefully it continually, your work just spreading and growing in such a positive light. Along with the frame drum and other meditative practices, what else, like how else do you spend your time?
Well, I am a gardener and a landscaper, permaculturist, so I spend a lot of time with the plants. That was another part of my own personal healing journey, was to really start to tune into the earth and plants specifically. So I'm a bit of a plant person. So I spend a lot of time working with the plants outside and working with their different properties. And I'm also a mother to a teenager and a community member, and love to maintain my close friendships. So it's a rich and simple life of drumming and plants, and yes, yoga and meditation, and also just being a human in this beautiful, challenging world. So I feel like there's a lot that we are all probably required to maintain: our inner landscape and our mental health and all of the different connections of making a livelihood and just weaving into culture. And this cross-cultural connection is really very meaningful. So it's another thing that I aspire to weave more deeply into my life. It's awareness of different cultures. So reading about ancient history, and that pretty much covers it. A little bit of cooking once in a while. Yeah. Rich, simple
Amazing.
life.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time and your presence and your energy. Um, if you could just state where everybody, the audience, can find you, social media, websites, your academy.
Thank you. Yes, there is the website sacreddrumming.com. Instagram is Sacred Drumming Academy. There's also a Facebook page, Sacred Drumming. I think there's a couple of them. If you were to see it, you would probably know. Lots of images of women with the frame drum. There's a KristaHolland.com website. I think there's also a YouTube Krista Holland out there, scattered around a bit. on the World Wide Web, some of the places you could find my work.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully in the near future we can connect again, and I can, continually asking questions of where this, amazing instrument is going. So thank you so much, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Christian. I would love to continue the
Thank you.
conversation. Thank you so much.